Greetings. It's 196th day of the full-fledged war, and we welcome you to Ukraine Media Center, Ukrinform. Our first briefing today is dedicated to the beginning of the academic year. We understand that there are many issues in terms of war. We have occupied territories, we have internally displaced children. And Yuriy Kononko, the head of the main Directorate of General Secondary and Preschool Education at the Ministry of Education of Ukraine, will be our speaker today. Can you hear us? Yes, I can hear you very well. So, the academic year has started. Do you have information how many children have been displaced and how many children started the studies or started going to the kindergarten? How many kindergartens are open? What's offline? What's online? What's happening? Do you have any basic stats for today? So we have some preliminary information about the studies. Let me first talk about the schools, and then we'll try also to find the info on kindergartens. So, overall, we think that the academic year is the 7th of September, and it started a week ago, so it started in the organized manner. The regional military administrations they tried to do everything possible to ensure safe and secure conditions for the educational process. At the moment, in Ukraine, we have 12,906 schools. Out of them, 3,539 started working in the regular mode, 3,800 in the mixed mode, and the rest in the online mode. But of course, also the wishes of the parents were considered. The parents are deciding about the mode of education for their children in line with the legislation. Also, overall, this year we'll have 3,900,000 children studying in the academic years. Intramural, it's about 800,000, and 1,300,000 they have this mixed mode, and 1,800,000 are studying remotely. So in offline and mixed mode, we have about 57% of the school children. But if we talk about the IDPs, 87,616 of them are IDPs, and abroad we still have 492,000 children and almost 17,000 teachers. Thank you. Do I understand correctly that the schools reopened in those places where it is safe, where they have bomb shelters, where they have all the safe and secure environment? Of course. It's when we talk about offline or mixed mode studies, and it's only those schools where local authorities said that they can provide offline conditions, because indeed not all the schools have shelters, and not all the schools can escort children to a nearby shelter in 500-meter radius. And we have 4,600 teachers working offline, 4,500 provide educational services using remote conditions, and 882 teach in the mixed mode. That's about preschools and kindergartens. Okay, so about the occupied territories. Can children study there? What's the situation there? And do you have contact with the teachers who stay in the occupied territories? And what's the policy of the Ministry of Education with regards to those. Well, here we have to start talking, that we, as the ministry and also local education departments and military administrations, we create all the conditions so that whenever it's possible and technically feasible, children who are in the occupied areas, so that they were able to study in Ukrainian schools located at Ukraine controlled territories, remotely or extramurally. So there is a way to teach children online. So now it only depends on the specific situation of those children. Unfortunately, it's not only about technical difficulties, even though we have to consider that in the most part of occupied areas, internet connectivity is limited. But also, we see a general public perception problem when the occupation government is actually not welcoming, or so to say it, or it's actively trying to punish citizens who want to teach their children in Ukrainian schools online. It's difficult. So this period of studies for those children who are now studying in European schools, will it be accredited here? Is there some tool set which would recognize their studies abroad in Ukraine? Of course. Here we have to separate the graduates and non-graduates. When we talk about graduate years, which is year 9 and year 11, so the last year of basic secondary education and complete secondary education, the procedure is clearly stated in the legislation. There is the procedure to recognize education certificates. So it's assessed, and we have the state enterprise called Information and Imaging Center, and they do this. When we talk about non-graduating years, when the war started, the ministry has issued a methodological order which outlines the following. If the child studies in Poland in a certain class and studies, for example, geography, then the student or the parents can contact this Polish school, and we've informed our partners about this, and the Polish school can issue an information letter that this child from Ukraine stayed in this Polish school in this period, and in that time the child studied this and that, it was assessed like this and that, so we need to have all the information. And then this information letter will be considered by Ukrainian schools when the next grade would be assigned for this student. This is it in brief. So does it have to be put into some international agreement or something? Is there any work going on to make sure the parents and the students would not have some bureaucratic issues when they come back? For graduating years, there's no need. It's very easy. Let me add to make it clearer. Of course, children in, say, in Polish schools, they will not mostly study some subjects, such as the history of Ukraine, even though it's organized in some schools. But overall, in these cases, when the child comes back, the school should organize additional classes for this child, and to organize the assessment to make sure that the curriculum, the Ukrainian curriculum, has been completed. So here, there's no bureaucracy. If there are doubts as to whether the child completed the curriculum for a certain year, then the school can create a commission which would assess the educational level of the students. If we talk about graduating years, the procedure is clearly stated in the legislation already, and we can't say that it takes some bureaucracy. So you do have to submit your papers to this agency. But, well, it's a regular procedure. We have to recognize the educational documents issued in different countries following this procedure. There are certain areas in Ukraine where evacuation continues, and there are people which are being displaced. So if some parents move to a different region now, after the new academic year has begun, will they face any issues with transferring a child to a local kindergarten or a local school? They shouldn't face these issues. The ministry has been reiterating for quite some time. We've focused the attention of regional authorities that now, in this situation, we have to provide maximum attention to children in difficult situations. And we don't have information that these issues exist. Now, we do receive a lot of letters to the email of the ministry with different complaints and grievances, but we did not have a case that, for example, an IDP child would not be transferred to a school. With kindergartens, it might be more difficult. Well, if in some areas not all the kindergartens are open, then yeah, there might be no places. But in any case, IDP children, they have all the same rights as people who were residents of that area. Any questions from the journalists? Hi. You have said that 492,000 Ukrainian children, Ukrainian students are abroad. So how many of them started studies in local schools abroad and are not studying online in Ukraine? A second question, how many schools have bomb shelters? Do you have some percentage? Thank you. If you could introduce yourself? Sorry, I'm Vitaly Golod from Ukrinform. So, with regards to the first question, no, we don't have the statistics broken down by countries, and we do not know whether all the children who are, for example, in Germany, are studying in Ukrainian schools. Let me briefly explain the general policy here. So, Ukraine will understand. Ukraine is interested to bring its children back to Ukraine with families. That is why we are trying to incentivize for the children to stay in the Ukrainian education system. So we encourage all of them to stay in touch with their school. It might be remote or extramural studies, or even family mode of studies when the parents are responsible for following the curricula. But indeed, there are difficulties. You've mentioned Germany, and yesterday we've had a big meeting with the representative of German Ministry of Education and the representatives of federal lands, because in Germany many aspects of educational policies are decided by the authorities of the federal lands, and there are areas where it's mandatory for children to go to school. So if a child stays in Germany, they have to go to school. Actually, same in Ukraine. The refugees from other countries who previously came to Ukraine, well, they had to send their children to schools regardless of the conditions why they ended up here, because, well, it's enshrined in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So, yeah, of course, we get letters that it's difficult when children have to go to a German school in the morning, and then there's some homework, and then also they have some online classes in the Ukrainian school. So the parents have to find a balance here. So we suggest in this case they could switch to what's called the family mode of studies or extramural studies. And sorry, I've forgotten the second question. Can you remind it? It was about the percentage of bomb shelters, the percentage of schools which have bomb shelters. And if we are building new schools, we'll have more bomb shelters. This percentage, I mean, I've said that 57%, so about 60% of children who study offline or in the mixed mode, it's more or less corresponding to the situation with shelters, not necessarily bomb shelters, but shelters. The shelters have to be there, and it's about that 57% of schools have them. Of course, now we continue work to complete existing shelters, or whenever possible to build new shelters. And then if the school gets the certificate that the shelter corresponds to all the codes and requirements of the law, then of course these schools can also open for offline studies, and then it would be up to the parents who would choose whether to study offline or online. Thank you. Any further questions? No more questions. Thank you. Thank you so much, Yuriy, for this information. I do hope we have more safe school and more safe spaces in Ukraine. And I would like to remind you that you are watching Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform. We have an adjustment to the schedule. Next briefing will be at 2 o'clock, and we'll talk to Fedor Venislavsky, the member of Parliament of Ukraine, and we'll talk about